savage surprise attack by two chimps on an American graduate student.
He's killing my friend!
Who's killing your friend?
My chimpanzee!
Conservatives will depict nature as a place of combat and competition, but it's just a conservative projection of their ideology on nature. Many anthropologists were extremely unhappy with the bonobo and tried to marginalize them because their story of human evolution doesn't turn around peace, it turns about warfare and male bonding.
Give us some examples of animal behavior that prove this kind of inherent morality in species.
Chimpanzees, for example, if someone is distressed because they have been attacked or they've seen a snake or whatever it is, then others come over and embrace them, kiss them and calm them down. But empathy is absolutely central. How could you have a moral system in human society if you don't particularly care about people? I feel that if we recognize the sentience of animals, there's an obligation to treat them better.
Yeah, I read your book, Different, and yeah, one of the key things you talk about actually is how language is one of the most contentious things in this field of study. So we'll get onto that with gender and sexuality later. But what do you think, and language is just one part of that, what do you think the methodology should be when applying these insights from close relative primates, as you do in your later books? And what do you think we should be wary of?
Yeah, there were usually a lot of warnings about anthropomorphism. We should avoid anthropomorphism, which was a way of saying, keep humans out of it. Talk about animals, but don't use human terminology because it confuses us. And my attitude was humans are animals. And if you take a close relative like the chimpanzee and you say the chimpanzee is jealous, I don't see why you cannot say that, or the chimpanzee is in a good mood or in a bad mood. All these things we should be able to say, but there was a taboo on that. And so the comparisons that I've made are between, let's say, politics or morality in humans and animals, basically going back to Darwin, because Darwin did the same thing. And then we entered in the previous century, what I call the Dark Ages, when Skinner ruled and declared animals machines, stimulus response machines. And so we moved from a time that you could talk about animal emotions to a time that it was taboo.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up morality, because a lot of your work is arguing for the fact that humans, through the research you do with primates, proving that humans are inherently moral. I was wondering if you could maybe elucidate on that and give us some examples of animal behavior that prove this kind of inherent morality in species.
Well, it started with my work on empathy. So in chimpanzees, for example, but also in bonobos and some other species, elephants, for example, if someone is distressed because they have been attacked or they have seen a snake or whatever it is, then others come over and embrace them and kiss them and calm them down. I call that consolation. In the 1990s, I met a woman who studied empathy in children, and from that time on, I called it empathy because that's exactly what she was measuring. She was measuring how children respond to the distress of others. Now, once you say animals have empathy, which we now say freely, but at the time was controversial, you enter the domain of morality. According to the Dalai Lama, all you need for morality is compassion. He said you cannot go wrong with compassion, which is probably true. But empathy is absolutely central. How could you have a moral system in human society if you don't particularly care about people? If you're not affected by their emotions, you don't care their situation. So empathy is absolutely a core capacity of human morality. Human morality goes beyond that, in that we make rules and principles, and so there's a cognitive overlay, but the basic emotions are similar.
Yeah, I mean, Iris Murdoch says that what underlines morality is this idea of attention and loving attention. And I think the recognition of another person is really crucial to morality.
Yeah, because without it, what do you have? You have probably a psychopath who can act morally, but is it really interested in you?
Something that really struck me in your work as well is the idea of how evolution kind of creates these impulses. So, for example, evolution creates the impulse of empathy to serve an evolutionary function, that is, to bind the group and whatnot. But then that impulse exists in its own right, and we shouldn't see it as evolution going wrong. So, like, for example, the example you use of people saving a whale and pushing it back into sea should be seen really as like a positive byproduct of evolution rather than as like an unnecessary thing that comes out of it.
Yeah. Certainly empathy did not evolve to take care of whales in the ocean. We can be sure of that. And if these people were hungry, they would do something else with the whale, I'm sure. So dependent on the circumstances, we can use empathy for all sorts of purposes. We can empathize even with our enemies. So it's something I'm sure was not the origin of empathy. But once a capacity exists, it becomes available for all sorts of other things. So, for example, the sexuality of bonobos. Sex, of course, originally is there to reproduce, but they use it for all sorts of other purposes. So once it is there, you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we'll move on to sex, gender, and sexuality at one point and a little bit later. But first, before we do, just to stay on morality for a second, in our research we came across the term veneer theory and your veneer theory. And as someone who studied Hobbes at secondary school and sixth form, I was wondering if you could outline your veneer theory and perhaps why you disagree with it.
Yeah, I get credited for the term veneer theory as if I agree with it, which is not the case.
Yeah, exactly.
Because for me, it's a sort of insult. It's like the biologists at the time in the 70s and 80s, they said we cannot be truly kind, we cannot be truly altruistic. Scratch an altruist and watch a hypocrite bleed. That was the expression at the time. So real kindness was fake, didn't exist in nature. And that was the sort of the slogan that they had. And I called it veneer theory. I said, our morality is just a thin veneer, underneath of which we are extremely selfish and have all sorts of brutal instincts. But it's very Freudian. But, both Freud had the same ideas about human civilization. It's just an overlay. But underneath we are selfish monsters, basically. So I call that veneer theory. And it was intended as an insult. But people now credit me for it, yeah.
Yeah, so as far as I understand, for our audience who might not be very familiar with your work, you disagree with the veneer theory because you believe that animals, humans, bonobos, chimpanzees, are inherently moral, and this isn't to do with religion, but is something that is, in some sense, biological.
Yeah. All animals, social animals, including humans, have very strong helping tendencies and empathic tendencies that are aimed at their friends and family. So it is very parochial. It doesn't usually extend beyond the group. But it's how the group survives. Because if my best buddy is wounded and cannot keep up with me, I'm going to slow down my movement. So that's the first act of empathy that you can do. And that's absolutely essential if you want to maintain relationships. And so we are inherently competitive and selfish. We're also inherently cooperative and kind. And empathy is an automatic response. In the beginning, when people studied empathy in humans, they had a very high level cognitive explanation, like empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of others, understanding others, theory of mind, stuff like that. But now we know that empathy is an automatic response. it comes up even unconsciously. So you're sitting with someone who is in a sad mood, you're going to be expressing sadness too. So automatically, you don't even think about it.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting the differences between particularly primate and human empathy. I think I hesitate to make a strong distinction, but I think a little leap has been made where I watched a documentary on Netflix. I'm not sure if you've seen it, Chimp Empire, talking about the documenting the Ngogo chimpanzees. And they do have empathy within their tribe effectively, but absolutely none, and violent behavior when it comes to the opposing tribe.
Oh, yeah.
So I was wondering what you think, maybe how and why that leap has been made in humans. Do you think that's the cognitive development, and so then adding the cognitive element to empathy, or what do you think might be under that?
Yeah, there's the in-group, out-group distinction is found in all animals, and in chimpanzees it's very violent. In bonobos it's non-violent. They're equally close to us, but they don't have these territorial wars that the chimps have. So yeah, there's very little empathy for outside the group, and I think humans originally were like that too. What happened with human morality is that it has a reasoning component. And so we say, if people have dignity and we need to treat people well, what about our enemies? Shouldn't that also apply to our enemies? And so the Geneva Conventions, for example, they're absolutely astonishing, because that's not something a chimpanzee would ever do. Treat your enemies well. So that's a human advancement of morality, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting that you speak about enemies, because in your latest book, there's an anecdote that you mention where two male chimps who are normally sworn enemies have their arms around each other, kind of forming this barricade between a newborn and this alpha male who might want to kill the newborn.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, these two, even in chimps, for example, I think that maybe sworn enemies can come together even in specific circumstances.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility. And if you introduce chimps to each other in captivity, so these are animals who don't know each other at all, there is initially a lot of tension, especially in the males. But in the end, they will become friends and they will do things together. So yeah, they can overcome the strangeness of the other, yeah.
I wonder if part of something I learned as well from that documentary, I wonder if part of the protective instinct for that child of them coming together is the fact that chimps actually don't know which exact chimp is their child or not their child. So in terms of the gene development, there might have been a development to protect all the children, because that's potentially pushing your own personal genome maybe.
Yeah, and some animals keep track of who they mated with. So they may not know about paternity and kinship, but they are protective of the young of females they have mated with, which is an indirect way of protecting your own offspring, of course. And it's very well possible that in that case of the two males who protected the newborn, that they had mated with the female, and the other male who was aggressive and obnoxious, that he never mated with the female. That's possible.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to drop you in a word from our sponsor Manscaped. You can use the discount code LOAF to get your discount, because even a lion needs to tame its mane.
Get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra from Manscaped now. Stay fresh with no cuts, so that your baguette leaves no crumbs.
Hey guys, we really hope you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Frans de Waal. If you'd like to see another episode just like this one, you can click right up here. Take care.